I think you can start.
All right, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the event. I would like to say a couple of words to kick off our joint event today. It's a cross-regional initiative, and I'd like to thank my fellow ambassadors from Costa Rica, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, Lithuania, and the United States, as well as the European Union, for this joint effort. We have engaged dedicated and experienced panelists from Facebook, EEAS, and fact-checking communities from Ukraine, Lithuania, and the Republic of Korea. We all look forward to a very interesting discussion today. It is another push to move the issue of tackling disinformation and misinformation higher on the UN agenda. Just a week ago, on the 30th of June, we took part in the Big Pause campaign within the Verified initiative. We fully share its main message to post before sharing online. The topic of our today's event resonates well with that message. It introduces an indispensable element to this chain of actions to check after posing and before sharing. Indeed, one can speak for hours on the matter, but I now would like to introduce our distinguished moderator, Ryan Heath. He is the author of Global Translations, Politico's global newsletter and podcast, and previously authored Politico's UN Playbook, Brussels Playbook, and Davos Playbook. Ryan moderated the first presidential debate of the 2019 EU election. Prior to Politico, he wrote for the Sydney Morning Herald in Australia and worked for the European Commission in Brussels as a presidential speechwriter and later as the Commission's spokesperson for digital issues. Mr. Hayes, I'm sure that many achievements are still ahead of you, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm so pleased we've got such a large and influential group of people joining us today because the task ahead is a massive one. We know that when people are exposed to false and inflammatory information, it undermines trust in our democratic institutions. And I can see from my daily work as a journalist that some of those institutions are already fraying. And in some cases, we even risk the development of parallel information universes developing and truly divided societies developing. So in the face of that, it is great to have ambassadors and experts from 4 continents, to have private sector experts from really large organizations, including Facebook. And the goal from today's discussion is to better understand what works in the field of fact-checking as a tool for countering disinformation and misinformation. And when we know what works, how can we spread that and see the convergences that might exist between our various approaches to the issue? We're going to hear from a total of 9 speakers with prepared remarks, and I know that's a lot, so I'm going to urge the speakers to choose the side of brevity, and I'm going to stay out of the way as much as possible so that we can bring as many of your questions from the audience into the discussion. So I'll quickly introduce our 4 distinguished speakers, and I'll save the introductions for our panelists for that second section of the event when we get to that. Coming up next, we're going to be joined by their excellencies, Emine Zaparova, the first Deputy Prime Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Arnoldas Pankevičius, who's Lithuania's Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Chi Hyun, who is the permanent representative for the Republic of Korea at the United Nations, and last but not least, Maher Nasser, who's the officer in charge of the UN Department of Global Communications. We're going to hear for about 3 minutes of remarks from each of them. And I want to welcome all of those distinguished speakers. And if I could now turn first to you, Minister Zaparova.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I'm really glad to welcome the participants of our today's event. And Ukraine has initiated this discussion to, of course, highlight the undermining impact of disinformation and misinformation, because we do have our experience that shows that It works like a radiation. You cannot see it, but it can affect even the mental health. We would also like to send a strong message that our common toolbox to counter this phenomena, in particular in the United Nations, should be strengthened. We are encouraged that we send this message together with a strong cross-regional group in the United Nations, including missions of Costa Rica, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, Lithuania, the United States, and the EU delegation, as Ambassador Kislitsa has already mentioned. And Vice Minister Prankevičius, distinguished ambassadors, let me, of course, express my appreciation over your co-sponsorship. I'd also like to thank Director Nasser and to ask him to convey to Under-Secretary General Fleming our appreciation of the work done by the able team of the Department of Global Communication. We have very interesting panelists and experienced moderator today that leave no chance to discussion to be boring. Dear friends, so in the best tradition of our recent international discussions, I will start with the words that COVID-19 pandemic served as a trigger for the UN and its member states to intensify the efforts in countering disinformation and misinformation. There is a number of valuable initiatives, including the verified campaign, the cross-regional statement on the infodemic in the context of COVID-19, as well as the UN General Assembly resolution, Global Media and Information Literacy Week, adopted this March. Ukraine actively contributed as a co-sponsor to this resolution. We are particularly glad that the United Nations member states supported our proposal to focus within a week of commemorative, educational, and public awareness activities that tackle the issue of disinformation and misinformation. And our today's event could be instrumental in preparation to this year's week. Fact and source checking is an important element of the efforts to counter information threats and to increase resilience of the societies. It is especially important nowadays when social media has brought the responsibility for not only can you hear me? Excuse me, I think I have some technical issues.
We can hear you well.
Okay, thank you so much. So it is especially important, of course, nowadays when social media has brought the responsibility for not proliferating fake news far beyond the media community. The danger of misinformation and disinformation is not limited to pandemic-related issues. Our security, democratic institutions and procedures, human rights, trade and environment are also under attack. We know quite well that disinformation creates a fertile soil for conflicts and hatred. It is a matter of priority for Ukraine now to fine-tune its activities and strengthen its institutional capacities. And this year we have created two institutions, Center for Countering Disinformation and Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security. And besides, we do have a very strong civil society, and some of our representatives are today here with us within this discussion. Promoting the issue of countering disinformation and misinformation at the framework of international organizations is also a part of our strategy. And the most recently, Ukraine has initiated within the Human Rights Council a joint statement on the harm of disinformation on multilateral human rights work that was delivered on the 2nd of July on behalf of almost 60 member states. Proper reflection in the UN agenda of the need to tackle disinformation and misinformation is crucial prerequisite for success of our efforts. And I hope that this event will serve this goal and wish all of us fruitful discussion that will not only thought-provoking, but also action-oriented. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'll now hand it over to the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs from the Republic of Lithuania.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much, and greetings from Vilnius, where we are in fact today hosting Ukraine Reform Conference with the presence of President Zelensky and foreign ministers of many EU member states and other partners from across Europe. And by the way, Ryan, I'm a big fan of yours, especially when you were still the editor of the political playbook here in Brussels, in Europe, and I hope you're doing well out there in the United States. Well, in fact, indeed, the topic of today's discussion is very important, and Lithuania has been, alongside other European countries, at the forefront of fighting disinformation already for many years. And especially, I would say, in the recent year and a half, we've seen the infodemics that has happened alongside pandemics as a major threat, not only to our democratic systems, but also to our individual critical thinking and mental health capacities. So today, probably there is no individual who would not understand the threat of such a phenomenon that is global. That, of course, was always present, probably as long as humankind has existed, but never before disinformation could spread so quickly, could be, in fact, be so devastating in its effects. And could be indeed be so dangerous to the foundations of our free societies. Therefore, no wonder that there is a famous saying that lie travels around the world when truth is only putting on its shoes. And here I think it's extremely important also to talk not only about different sources of disinformation online, but also some systemic sources of disinformation, and one of them is next to our borders, and that is Russia. Russia that has used tactics of disinformation as part of its foreign policy in order to not only influence democratic processes within our countries, but also divide the West, also to undermine stability in some of our partner countries like Ukraine, and also attack from within different nations, from the United States to the United Kingdom, to the Baltic states, Czech Republic, to mention just a few. And in order to be much more effective in disarming such kind of information, we need an international effort. We need a multilateral response and indeed a multi-level systemic approach to that. Firstly, fact-checking is very important, and support for the fact-checkers is crucial. You'll hear later in the discussion a very good example from Lithuania, Debunk EU, Viktoras Daukšas, representing this organization that has been a bottom-up approach, bringing together the ELSE and the artificial intelligence in order to every day filter thousands of different narratives and provide fact-checking material to different media organizations in Lithuania. In Europe, we have European Digital Media Observatory, which is a hub for European fact-checkers where they can share experience and become much more resilient. Secondly, I would say the online platforms are very important, their role, and therefore I'm so happy that Facebook is also included in today's discussion, because it's so crucial to make sure that we are on board together. Again, the European Union has already for a few years launched the code of practice, good practice, with the GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, and other organizations in order to make sure that we can have the help of online platforms in countering disinformation in their world. And thirdly, I would say the resilience of our societies. Of course, importance of critical thinking, education, outreach, strategic communication to make sure that our individual citizens are on board as well. So let us share experiences during this conference. Let us hear the good examples of good practice. And I once again salute this initiative, and I bring the warmest regards from Vilnius to everyone.
Thank you, Vilnius. From Europe, we now turn to East Asia, and I hand the floor to the ambassador from the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Excellencies, dear colleagues. I'd like to first extend my sincere appreciation to all of you for joining today's meeting to discuss this timely issue. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, we have been witnessing an outbreak of another epidemic as well. It is a dangerous epidemic of misinformation and disinformation, or infodemic. During the unprecedented crisis of the pandemic, we have had to do two things for our health and safety. First, we have isolated ourselves from other people. Second, we still have had to stay informed and entertained all the time. This led us to be exposed to a staggering amount of mis and disinformation from various media platforms, including SNS services such as Facebook and YouTube. The devastating impact of the proliferation of mis and disinformation in our societies has, worryingly, not remained online. Indeed, we have witnessed 5G wireless service towers being burned. Conflict regarding race, class, and gender have been worsening, and we have seen more ethnicity-related violence, xenophobia, and bias, including wrong information on vaccines since last year. With this in mind, one of the main topics we must discuss moving forward to is how to tackle this negative phenomenon. This could take the form of regulatory measures by governments and media companies. However, we should be mindful of the voices from civil society and human rights defenders expressing concerns about any restrictions on freedom of speech. Dear colleagues, against this backdrop, I'd like to make the following 3 points. First, fact-checking should be a sustainable global practice in order to ensure a healthier and more resilient information environment. In fact, fact-checking can be regarded as a global commons in that it takes time and cost, but it is easy to take a free ride. To make this more sustainable, all stakeholders, including governments and media companies, should make sure that everyone will benefit from investment in fact-checking. The Seoul National University Fact-Check Center, which provides a fact-checking platform for journalists in Korea, could be regarded as a good example for our endeavors to make fact-checking a global practice. Dr. Chung, director of the center, will explain in detail in the following panel session what the center is doing and what they have achieved so far. Second, our fact-checking strategy should be combined with increasing public media literacy. Given the complex and multifaceted nature of the flow of information, our approach to enhance public awareness on the issue should be more holistic. Also, as people's lack of trust in government authorities and/or mainstream media worsens the situation, measures to restore public trust should be implemented alongside fact-checking process as well. Last but not least, our discussions on fact-checking need to be more inclusive. This is not only a matter of the United Nations staying relevant. Now, the sources of information are so diverse, ranging from various chat rooms of mobile messenger services to the so-called Clubhouse, a new voice-based SNS platform. We should share our best practices and combine efforts to deal with this fact-checking environment. Like today, we should invite academia, the private sector, and other stakeholders to discuss this issue in a more inclusive way. Colleagues, the COVID-19 crisis has illuminated just how much we are interdependent and intertwined in our interconnected world. The lesson learned from the pandemic is very clear. Elevated cooperation and solidarity matters. In this regard, the Republic of Korea reiterates a strong commitment to ongoing efforts to make the existing information environment both healthier and more resilient. I look forward to our panel discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. On those points of a holistic view and inclusion, it's a great time to bring the United Nations itself into the discussion. So over to you, Mr. Nanda.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. I wish to start by thanking the organizers of this cross-regional event, the permanent missions of the Republic of Costa Rica, Ghana, the Republic of Korea, the Republic of Lithuania, Ukraine, the United States of America, and the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations in New York. Thank you for inviting me to join a distinguished speaker panel in the opening panel of a very important and timely topic. The concept note for today's event captures key highlights from the department's work to counter misinformation and disinformation, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres' early warnings about the added challenge of what he called this tsunami of misinformation, hate, scapegoating, and scaremongering, and the great success achieved by Verified, amplified by the active engagement of a majority of member states. Thank you. Verified, our COVID-19 Communications Response Initiative, was launched in May 2020 to tackle the growing scourge of misinformation around COVID-19, to counter vaccine hesitancy and advocate for solidarity and vaccine equity. We introduced innovative and creative content, built a network of 70,000 plus information volunteers, and through outreach and partnerships and your support, we were able to reach 1 billion people in 2020. Our approach and strategy were based on simplifying and amplifying key messaging on how to respond to the pandemic based on WHO guidance, encouraging people to pause and to take care before they shared information. Promoted solidarity with the Only Together campaign, driving the message that to beat the pandemic globally, we have to beat it everywhere. No one is safe until everyone is safe. Our campaign was based on the need to change the way people shared information, introducing behavioral change, a concept later verified by surveys in select countries that have shown that interrupting emotional urge to share information, and by introducing a pause moment, that led to a reduction in sharing of unverified information and encouraged critical thinking, a key tool in countering a flood of misinformation across multiple platforms. The new Pledge to Pause campaign that was launched a week ago today is set to continue until the Global Media and Information Literacy Week at the end of October, and we count on your continued participation and support. The pause moment is a moment to check the facts. In late April of this year, and as part of Verified, we organized an event entitled COVID-19, How Do We Prevent the Pandemic from Becoming a Media Extinction Event? The event was in cooperation with the philanthropic organization Luminate, and we were honored to have His Excellency Mr. Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, Minister of Information of Ghana, as a keynote speaker and a panelist. In his message to this event, Secretary General Antonio Guterres highlighted another dangerous side effect of the pandemic, the accelerated financial decline of many public interest media organizations, especially newspapers, whose estimated losses in 2020 amounted to $30 billion, leading some to call the pandemic a media extinction event. A key element in fighting disinformation and misinformation is maintaining independent, fact-based reporting as an essential global good, public good, which is critical to building a safer, healthier, and a greener future. the Secretary General welcomed the creation of the International Fund for Public Interest Media that aims to secure sufficient funding and support to independent media organizations around the world, especially in low and middle income countries. And he urged member states, donors, and other stakeholders to support it. In short, we need to continue encouraging critical thinking and behavioral change in how people share information, building a culture of fact-checking, a key component of information literacy, and support public interest media and fact-checking across all platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's now time that we shift into our practitioner panelist section of the event, and we've got 5 great panelists. So I'm going to introduce them now, and then we'll get into hearing from them. We'll hear a little bit longer from them, about 5 minutes each, and some have slides to share with you. Our panelists are starting with Lutz Gullner, who's the Head of Information Analysis for the EU's Diplomatic Service, the EEAS. We also have Jessica Zucker, who's Head of Misinformation Policy for Europe, Middle East, and North Africa at Facebook. A huge job, I don't envy it. Yevhen Fedchenko, he's the Director of the Mola School of Journalism and the Chief Editor of Stop Fake in Ukraine. Victor Daukas, who's head of the Debunk EU Disinformation Analysis Center in Lithuania, and Dr. Yongrong Chong, who is the director of the SNU Fact Check Center in the Republic of Korea, and she's an independent member and of the advisory board of IFCN, the fact-checking network. Maybe if I just go straight into it, Lutz, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you for the invitation. I'm the head of the strategic communications team at the EU's diplomatic service. I'm heading a team of about 40 experts, actually, that are specialized in strategic communication, in tracking and tracing disinformation. And I would like to just spend a few minutes in sharing some of our, let's say, insights and in particularly lessons learned. And maybe we need to start with the fact that disinformation and information manipulation is not an abstract issue. It can have very real life impact on our societies, on our security, even on our health. And we will hear a lot about the COVID crisis. We heard a lot about vaccines. And many examples where we show that sometimes this can have real life impact. So we need to tackle it. The EU has been, let's say, working on this issue in full steam since 2015, and even more so since 2018, under the impression of a number of developments, in particular, of course, also in the society, the abundant spread of disinformation, and with an additional focus on this issue since the start of the COVID-19 crisis and the infodemic that was mentioned already. And since 2018, we have developed quite a number of new instruments, a new policy framework, which is in itself quite complex. And I will come back to this issue. The biggest challenge that we are facing, and I'm pretty sure that also the panelists will confirm this, is that we are looking at a developing issue, at a still kind of changing issue. The threats, the tactics, the issues that we are facing as governments, as civil society, are in a permanent flux. And that's why there is no easy answer to this, no easy policy answer to these issues. We see manipulation in terms of content, in terms of identities, in terms of reach, and all this, of course, both in the online and the offline world. And as I said, based on our experience over the past years in our work, we see really 5 takeaways that are crucial, also for international cooperation and also for this discussion that we're having here. The first one is we need to have not only a clear understanding of the issue that we are facing, but we also need to distinguish the different forms of disinformation very clearly from each other. Misinformation, which is spread unintentionally, which is more a sort of junk news, if you want to use that term, is a very different phenomenon, a very different challenge from the disinformation, which is being produced intentionally to mislead, to misguide, to deceive the societies or people. And there's a third form of this disinformation that was already mentioned. It can also be used as a form in the international relations, as a manipulative instrument. And then the issue becomes a security and foreign policy issue. And we need to distinguish these forms very clearly from each other, because each and every of these phenomena requires a different policy response, a different focus in any case of the different elements. We are working with many of you here in this conference, but also with other partners worldwide on clarifying these concepts, on having a better, let's say, grip also on the policy responses that are needed. The second point is also mentioned already. It remains a multifaceted challenge, a multifaceted issue that requires a multifaceted approach. There is no single issue. Even if we focus today here on fact-checking as one of the key issues that are necessary to tackle this issue, we still need many more at the same time. We need to look into digital policy, into education policy, into foreign policy, into many other areas. And I think the challenge for governments in particular will be to coordinate all this, to think all these elements together. Third takeaway is this is an all of society issue. It's nothing that a government alone can fix, can find a response to. We need to empower civil society, journalists, media practitioners, civil society organizations, and we will hear from some of them right after me as well, which is a crucial element. And we should never forget this in every policy response that we design. We need these two elements. Fourth and nearly last element in our takeaways is we also need to develop clear rules of the game for the actors that are playing in this field. And I'm referring in particular to social media platforms. I know kind of on the panel, I will be succeeded by a representative of Facebook. We have developed here in the European Union an approach with two main instruments, which is called the Code of Practice, which are very clear rules of the game in terms of transparency, but also in terms of responsibility of each and every actor, including the social media platforms. And we're discussing draft legislation in the form of the Digital Services Act that I'm happy to come back in the discussion. Last but not least, we really need international cooperation for a number of reasons. Number one is if we don't have a common understanding of what the issue is that our respective societies are facing, we will not be able to grasp it. Secondly, disinformation does not stop at a border. It is a worldwide, cross-regional phenomenon, and that's why I think international cooperation is absolutely necessary. But it is also necessary to develop common responses in some of these issues that we are discussing today. Last but not least, and that's my last point, as an international community, we also need to think about international norms in this field. What is it that should be allowed? What is it that we should look at as well? What are the rules of the game also in the international sphere here? I stop here. Back to you, Ryan. Many thanks.
Thanks, Lutz. Now time to hear from Jessica Zucker at Facebook, which faces a great weight of expectation, growing in line with the impact that it's had in the world. Jessica, over to you to tell us what's really working in the field of fact-checking.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation to be part of this multi-stakeholder panel, such really truly distinguished speakers. I lead Facebook's work for misinformation policy for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. As Ryan said, I've also been leading Facebook's work globally to combat COVID-19 and vaccine misinformation globally since the start of the pandemic. Very much looking forward to the discussion today. To give you some context about my role on Facebook, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we approach it. I'm part of a global team at Facebook called Content Policy. It's our job to write the rules for what is and is not allowed on Facebook. Our goal really is to create a place where people can express themselves while also keeping people safe at the same time. And to do this, which is admittedly a very difficult job, we work with experts from around the world, including organizations like the UN and the World Health Organization, to ensure that we're drawing the lines in the right place. Now, I want to start by setting some boundaries around definitions. As Lutz already mentioned, the EAS and the EU take a certain approach when it comes to definitions. And I think this is an incredibly important place to start any conversation, because really the first challenge in reducing the spread of misinformation is agreeing on and defining the boundaries of what that is. You'll hear a lot of people talk about different concepts, from fake news to misinformation to disinformation to inauthentic behavior to coordinated inauthentic behavior and information operations. Each of these different terms can mean different things. And as Lutz mentioned, different policy responses are needed for each part of this problem. So to give you Facebook's definitions, which are admittedly slightly different from Lutz's, at Facebook, we differentiate between false and misleading content, which we consider to be misinformation, regardless of whether it was shared intentionally or unintentionally. We differentiate from misinformation, this kind of concept, from disinformation, which we see as the malicious sharing of potentially harmful content. This includes malicious behavior, inauthentic actors who are sharing content, regardless of whether it's true or false. So that's the definitional side. Getting into now, what does Facebook do to approach misinformation? So I'm going to be focusing on the false content. So a false claim, the sky is black, for example, the sky is red. False information is the scope of what I'll cover today. So we take a three-part approach to combating misinformation. First, we remove content that violates our community standards. These are the rules that are made publicly available and determine what is allowed and not allowed on the platform. It includes a number of different restrictions, such as not allowing the use of a fake account or not posting voter interference or hate speech or bullying. And for misinformation, this includes false claims that can contribute to the risk of imminent physical harm. And since the pandemic began, we've applied this policy to addressing harmful misinformation about COVID-19 and vaccines. So for example, we don't allow types of content like saying COVID vaccines cause autism, or if you just drink bleach, you'll be cured from coronavirus. To give you some stats, since the pandemic began, we've removed more than 18 million pieces of content on Facebook and Instagram for violating this policy around harmful misinformation about COVID-19 and vaccines. That's the first part of our strategy, removing the most harmful forms of content. The second part of our strategy is for misinformation that does not lead to imminent physical harm or otherwise violate our community guidelines. Our approach is to dramatically reduce the distribution of false rated content so fewer people are likely to come across it on the platforms. We think that this approach strikes the right balance between freedom of expression and safety. In other words, we will allow people to post it as a form of free expression, but we're not going to show it at the very top of people's news feeds. Third, the last part of our strategy to combat misinformation is to empower users to make informed judgments about the content that they see online. This is why connecting people to authoritative sources of information, surfacing more context about content that is displayed on the platform, and supporting media literacy efforts is really critical to our approach. And again, to give you some statistics here, during the pandemic, we partnered with governments and health organizations, including the UN, to connect over 2 billion users to accurate information and resources about COVID and vaccines. Now, switching gears slightly to talk a little bit about our fact-checking program. As part of our approach to combating misinformation, this three-part approach I've just discussed, we work with 80 independent third-party fact-checking organizations who cover 60 languages around the world. All of our fact-checking partners have been certified by the International Fact-Checking Network. Their job is to rate and review content on Facebook, and then Facebook takes a number of different enforcement actions. So once a fact checker rates something as false, what we do is we dramatically reduce the distribution of that content on the platform. We add a strong warning label, letting people know when they come across it that it's been rated false. And we add warning screens and notifications to users who previously shared it. So to give you some statistics, we've labeled 167 million pieces of content between March and October of last year for containing COVID-19 misinformation. And we know that these efforts are working because 95% of the time when people saw that warning screen, they did not click through to see the original false content. And I think these findings actually really corroborate the findings that Mr. Nasser spoke about in the UN's Pause Before Sharing campaign. Now, finally, I want to speak to the importance of supporting the fact-checking community. We've taken a number of steps since we launched our fact-checking program several years ago, and we've continued to do so throughout the pandemic. We've contributed more than $84 million to programs supporting our fact-checking efforts through the Facebook Journalism Project, and this includes direct support to fact-checkers for their work on our platform, as well as industry initiatives like sponsorships, fellowships, and grant programs. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Wow, that 95% number really is quite, made an impression on me. Thank you, Jessica. Now it's over to Ukraine again, where we're going to hear from Mr. Fedchenko, the chief editor of Stop Fake. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much, distinguished guests, excellencies, and colleagues. Thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this great panel and to share my thoughts with you. It's a great honor. Stop Fake was involved in tackling Russian disinformation through fact-checking during the last 7 years, and with other Ukrainian NGOs, we have accumulated a huge experience in building national resilience against information warfare. If I can give you only one figure to describe our achievements, it would be 5,000. That's the number of fake stories we debunked so far. 5,000 stories. Is it too many or no? These were 5,000 stories. Each of them could potentially kill Ukrainians, either on the front line or in the COVID-19 infodemics. These were 5,000 bullets of information warfare, and we were capable to stop them through fact-checking. Ukraine is an open society. As any open society, it's very vulnerable against state or non-state perpetrators who want to take advantage of openness of our media system. Using instruments of fact-checking, we were capable to identify, first of all, who is the main actor, what platforms main actors are using, and what narratives they are exploiting. According to recent research conducted by UNDP and UNICEF in Ukraine, social networks and television are top preferable sources of news in Ukraine, 42% and 26% respectively. 42 social networks and 26 television. And they are followed by 22%, which are channels and groups in messengers. All these three groups are absolutely open to disinformation and misinformation if some actors want to do that. And here we see the growing potential for involvement of fact checkers, and Ukrainians' capability to identify fakes is growing from year to year, which is a good sign for evaluating resilience in Ukraine. And also we see the growing profile of fact checkers in Ukraine. According to the same poll conducted by UNDP and UNICEF, at least 21% of Ukrainians can identify at least one fact-check organization, which is really very, very good compared to many other countries. Also, another research gives us another interesting figure, which is 77% of Ukrainians are aware of existence of disinformation. Again, is this good or is this bad? 77% is absolutely great, but also we should remember about the remaining 23% of people who still would not be capable to identify disinformation. And also by saying that we have 77% identifying disinformation, it doesn't mean that those people would not consume disinformation or misinformation, or would not trust it if they see it, or would not share it with other people. So here we come to the lessons. So what are biggest Stop Fake takeaways from our 7 years of doing fact-checking? First of all, we really need to foster a very strong culture of fact-checking in Ukraine and in many other places. And I agree with all those people who were speaking before me that it should be done at a universal basis. Also, we need to look for careful combination of fact-checking media literacy, and limiting access to malign sources of information which are proliferating still. Also, we need to look for adaptive strategy, because what we noticed during 7 years that disinformation is very adaptive, and they use any opportunity to find new niches and new platforms to disseminate what they want if we stop them on other alternative platforms. So they're very flexible, and we need also to be very flexible as well. The next thing, we need to look for audience engagement. And that's exactly what we do at Stop Fake. If you would go to our website, stopfake.org, you would see the very clear label that we invite our audiences to contribute to what we do. And it's called Report a Fake. So basically, anyone from our audience can push the button and send us the fake if they want our fact checkers to look into that. And we think it greatly contributes to the proliferation of culture fact-checking. And another thing we do here is we share our knowledge, how we do fact-checking. And that's very important, because basically we invite anyone from the audience and say that, hey, you also can do it yourself. It's very easy. So we write a lot about technologies we're using, approaches, how to analyze textual information, how to look for fake photos, how to identify and verify fake videos, and other tips which are very, very popular among audiences. Also, we need to look for cross-border cooperation. You cannot fight disinformation in one place, because it would definitely come to you from very different directions. So again, it should be absolutely universal, and that's why Stop Fake joined IFCN to work very closely with our colleagues in many other countries across different languages to have an opportunity to look more holistically at what happens in media ecosystem in general. Also, we need to look for cooperation between different stakeholders, and that's why Stop Fake is very actively cooperating with different state agencies in Ukraine, other governments outside of Ukraine's technological platforms, like Facebook, and that's multiply our efforts and amplify what we can do, because as fact checkers, we can identify fake news, we can verify them, we can debunk them, but there are some things which still up to governments, for example, how to regulate platforms which are distributing fake news, for example, TV channels which are still used in Ukraine as a sources of fake news. And the next point is enforcement. So from this point of view, I'm very happy that we work with Facebook, and as Jessica already described how our cooperation as a third-party fact checkers happens, I would just add that, for example, from the point of view of media outlets, it's very important, because they know that we not only identify them as a source of fake news, but if they would not be more careful with news writing and news distribution, they definitely would be identified as platforms for fake news. And that basically would ruin their trustworthiness among their audiences. So from this point of view, now we see much more feedback from media outlets, and they react very quickly if they identify that their story is not completely factual based. They immediately try to make the story more factual. And so now we see a huge difference between our activities like 7 years ago, where we were just identifying those platforms that are disseminating fake news. And now, due to our cooperation with Facebook, we can much more effectively pinpoint to this very problem. Another issue is balancing legislature at any kind of national level, and also creating of international system of fighting disinformation. Very specific, because we are dealing with global media system and global disinformation ecosystem. And to answer those challenges, we really need to work together. So that's all my points, my takeaways from 7 years at StopFake. Thank you so much. I would be happy to answer your questions.
You did a great job boiling all of that work down. Thank you so much. Our next couple of speakers have slides. So if you're not looking at your screen, the next few minutes is a good time to take a moment to look at your screen. Next up is Viktoras Dokas, who's the head of the Debunk EU Disinformation Analytical Center in Lithuania.
Hello, everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for having us here and inviting to this huge event. It's our honor to be here. I would like to share some strategic insights a bit from different angles to structure this problem and also to provide some of our experiences and ideas how this problem can be solved. So Debunk is currently operating in 6 countries, and we analyze every month around 15,000 articles manually, and from that we produce 8 to 10 reports and we publish them every month. We have active volunteers, around 50 people volunteering and supporting our work, helping to debunk cases, to spot them, and to train machines on that. We focus on 4 things. We do analysis of disinformation. On a daily basis, we analyze Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland. Now we are starting more work in the Balkans, in North Macedonia and Montenegro. And we monitor disinformation campaigns during elections. Then we organize a lot of trainings and carry some of the media literacy campaigns that I will share with you. Having a point on the bigger picture, it's really important to have not only the manual work, and we know that disinformation actors, they already use quite a lot of automations to generate comments, to edit them, to publish them, to use the bots and other inauthentic behavior networks to spread and multiply the content. Therefore, it's also important for the organizations who are countering disinformation to use some of the tools that can actually help to increase the productivity and to automate at least part of the processes, so people would do what machines can't, and machines would support the work. So therefore, we're using to discover disinformation or harmful content, we're using machine learning or artificial intelligence to predict the problematic content. That is later reviewed by human analysts, and then they are doing the actual analysis to analyze if the machines predicted correctly. We're very careful to what can be automated. This is a very important field, so it would be very explainable and there would be no black box principle. This is an example of process, how we process information. So we monitor more than 2,000 outlets that publish hostile content, publish mis and disinformation, and they produce more than 1 million content pieces every month. So that is quite a large scale of how much, and it's not all of it. There is much more. Currently, we monitor in 26 languages. So AI helps to categorize everything, put in different shelves. Then we use our volunteers and supporters and the analysts to review the content. In the 3rd step, disinformation analysis is being done by analyzing each content piece that was predicted to be harmful. Then we visualize the data and we produce the final reports that we disseminate through the media. It's very important to measure the impact. So we measure on every content piece level to measure how widely it was being spreading. And we only debunk the cases that are having this viral effect. So they are really harmful and the ones that are spreading virally fast. This is just an example of how the reports look. So they are very visual. If we analyze COVID, so during 1 month, we might find from 70 to 100,000 content pieces about COVID from the hostile media. And then after we analyze, we end up between 1,000 and 3,000 cases of mis and disinformation that we find later in the analysis. Another example of the scale, how big is the scale? So with the first landing of Ryanair airplane in Minsk in the period of less than a week, There were more than 4,000 content pieces produced by hostile media, and that just shows how big is the problem. And the fact checkers are already doing a lot of good work, but the scale is actually much bigger. And it's really important to think how to approach the problem, that the same cases that are already debunked, they are still reappearing, they are being recycled, and they are spreading all around. To solve a few problems, one of them, how can we train the analysts so we would receive the repeatable results by different people working on the same problem. Our 5 professors and PhDs worked for almost 2 years to develop the methodology, which is now nearly a book of 250 pages. And to train people on this helps a lot to have this consistency and deliver the results much faster, and therefore to automate better. Last year we did this gamification approach campaign, and that is developed. This game is developed by Cambridge University and a Netherlands company called Jog, and we adapted this case for Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and we launched the digital campaign. And research shows that it makes people 20% more resilient to disinformation. And this game was played by 118,000 people in the Baltics. So it was quite a huge result, and one of the probably biggest media campaigns in the Baltics. When I mentioned the methodology, what we end up doing with that, so we designed a digital course. It's an 8-hour course to train new analysts who would be able then to work with disinformation analysis, also taking the exam. So this is also a way now how we are training, and we are selecting the people who can actually do analysis in any country in the world. After this, we are starting to do this practical training, which means that the potential analysts, they're going over between 4 to 12 weeks practical trainings to publish a first report and then to be certified as a disinformation analyst and work in NGOs on its stratcoms. Broadening, so we started to work with universities. We are developing civic resilience course. Currently, we are working with 10 universities to implement the course for the first grade students. So we are concentrating problem on the Generation Z that is very overconfident with their abilities to spot disinformation and actually debunk it. And we see that there's multiple research show that they have high confidence, but when the skills are measured, 80% of them fail to spot disinformation. Therefore, we're starting this 90-minute course to integrate with universities and looking more partner universities in other countries. All our reports can be found in debunkeu.org secure website. And if you would like to reach us or talk with us, we are always available. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I find that a bit shocking, the mismatch of the skills expectations and the skills reality in that younger group of people. So I'm really glad to have been shown that information. Now we have to give a gold medal for patience and commitment to Dr. Yun-Ryung Chong, who has stayed up until midnight to join us for this session from Seoul. She also has some slides. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for having me for this valuable event. Today, I'd like to share the experience of the SNU fact check. Before explaining SNU fact check, let me introduce the current information environment in Korea. As we witnessed in many democratic societies, mainstream media in Korea is suffered by low trust of Korean people. According to recent survey, Koreans' trust of news is only 32%, while average of surveyed countries is 44%. Despite low trust toward media, the mainstream media is the main actor of fact-checking in Korea. In this situation, I'd like to emphasize the importance of collaboration. Collaboration is not a new term in the field of fact-checking. We have seen collaborative fact-checking efforts such as Crosscheck in France, Verificado in Mexico, and EU fact-check. When mis and disinformation easily cross the borders, verifying facts needs the collaboration domestically as well as internationally. In the case of SN Fact Check in Korea, collaboration is constant, autonomous, and the framework of cooperation is installed on the platform. SN Fact Check is a non-profit fact-checking institution at Seoul National University. SN Fact Check Center provides the fact-checking platform and 30 affiliated media outlets from conservative to liberal post fact-checking contents on a daily basis. The SN Fact Check standardized the format for affiliated media outlets. Fact-checked results are represented by a total of 6 values from not true to true, additionally undecided. But what falls within the realm of journalists' inherent editorial decision, such as what to verify, and how to judge, is autonomously decided by the media. An important characteristic of SN Fact Check is that the affiliated media outlets can cross-check any issue on a regular basis. During the cross-checking process, media outlets do not discuss how to verify each other and post the results with a time gap. Cross-checking system of SN Fact Check provides a neutral territory where the liberal and conservative media together can agree to judgment in the realm of facts, not of ideology. Despite its significance, cross-checking on SN Fact Check has been sluggish. Since the inception of SN Fact Check, 15.6% were cross-checked. The relative dearth of cross-checked cases is due to the competition among media outlets. Journalists were reluctant to cross-check because they felt that they would fall behind in competition. While cross-checking has not reached its full potential, it seems to have a positive effect of enhancing the quality of journalism. The journalists are more attentive in investigation because their verification could be re-verified by other journalists. I'd like to stress more on the socio-political meaning of cross-fact-checking. The Korean civil society is energetic enough to impeach the president through peaceful demonstration. At the same time, it is highly politicized and partisan. In the time of COVID-19, public information is often tarnished by political conspiracy theories. The ecosystem of rumors separated from the mainstream media is increasingly being built. In such a polarized space of opinion, cross-fact-checking by opposing media outlets may provide a public forum where verifiable facts can be groundwork for discussion. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so patient to stay up until the middle of the night. It's now time to encourage all of you to pose some questions to the panelists, so please put them in the chat function if you have those questions. A couple of people got in before the event started, so I'd now like to hand it over to Ambassador Jeff De Laurentiis, one of the most senior officials at the US mission to the UN. Please let us know what your question is, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Ryan, and thanks to all for this discussion today on mis and disinformation and the role that fact-checking plays in countering the spread of false information. We're pleased to have co-sponsored this event, and we thank the permanent missions of Costa Rica, Ghana, Republic of Korea, Lithuania, Ukraine, and the European Union delegation for their partnership on this issue. I just want to make a brief observation. As an active member of the Freedom Online Coalition, we're deeply concerned with the growing scope and sophistication of disinformation employed by state and non-state actors with malign motives. The US takes a holistic approach in identifying, tracking, and countering disinformation. We deny malign actors the space to promulgate false narratives when we expose sources of disinformation, when we increase societal resilience by supporting media literacy and championing independent media, and when we employ the latest tools and technology to deter and expose disinformation. But countering the increasing threat of disinformation requires whole of society efforts from governments, independent media, civil society groups, including fact checkers, academia, and the private sector. It's also important that governments and internet service providers address disinformation by providing reliable information through public messaging, support for public service announcements, and emergency support for public broadcasting and local journalism. Ultimately, we must take care that our approaches to countering disinformation also do not inadvertently abuse or violate human rights and fundamental freedoms, which undergird our democracies, including freedom of expression, both online and offline. Again, thank you to the panelists for your excellent presentations. Thanks, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Oh, sorry, gotta make sure I unmute myself. Thank you so much, Ambassador. We also have a statement or a comment from Ambassador Maritza Chan, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative from Costa Rica's mission to the UN. Over to you, Deputy Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Costa Rica is a proud co-sponsor of this event, and we would like to thank the panelists for their presentations. We have heard today, misinformation is a multifaceted issue requiring multiple lessons to fully understand its origins and reach. An organization is better poised to address such a complex issue than the United Nations. This is why the UN recognizes that fact-checking is not just about accuracy. Fact-checking is a global public good. Access to accurate information can and must be understood as a human right. On this note, we would like to raise 2 points and then make 2 questions. First one, we remain deeply concerned that misinformation is increasingly ignored by or even deliberately developed and promulgated by states. All states must become responsible arbiters of fact and accuracy, rather than peddling in political opportune falsehood. Spreading misinformation may seem at first like an easy, convenient maneuver to manipulate public opinion, but really, for Costa Rica, it is a sign of state weakness, one that will always backfire. Indeed, maintaining fidelity to fact and proper context is not only better communication, it's a demonstration of strength, confidence, and responsibility. Indeed, a sign of recognition by states that they do not need to mislead to lead. Second, we would like to stress that as the world premier intergovernmental organization blessed with access to some of the finest global minds and most salient research, the UN must play a central role in ensuring the health and integrity of the global public information exchange. Disinformation undermines first elections, fuels violent conspiracy theories, deepens sectarian divisions, and erodes communities' ability to advance health priorities and other manifestations of civic interest. In other words, misinformation distorts matters that the UN has a direct stake in and a clear responsibility to help lead. For this reason, the global reach and unparalleled resources of the UN must be mobilized to develop an international culture of fact-checking and evidence-based critical inquiry. This must be through policies and norms, but also through cultivating habits of accepting responsibility and to communicate truth and holding ourselves and each other accountable. This is why the UN Verify initiative is so crucial. As the SG had said, good communication saves lives. So now we know that there's a large and growing appetite for fact-checking, for integrating information instead of simply consuming it, for verifying information before sharing it. As the current pandemic evolves yet again, with variants spreading through the world, crossing borders and cultures, disrupting human security and well-being, and leading to a new round of deadly consequences, some still choose to embrace misinformation and conspiracy. But more and more people are looking for sound, evidence-based guidance, free of political considerations. In this regard, Costa Rica would like to raise two questions. The first one, how would you better frame accurate information as a human right? The second question is addressed to our panelists from Facebook. How diversity of background and lived experience in her team leads to a more vigilant and accurate misinformation screening. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deputy Ambassador. Maybe I'll give first a chance to Jessica from Facebook to respond to that question. And we also have a question from one of the audience members. So I'll jump into that once you've had a chance to reply, Jessica.
Great, thank you so much for the very important question. Diversity of experiences, beliefs, languages, cultures is absolutely integral to the work that we do at Facebook. I mentioned my team is called Content Policy. We're made up of several hundred people from around the world. We're based in San Francisco, Seattle, New York, DC, Dublin, London, Hyderabad, Singapore, probably more countries that I can remember. And all of us come from extremely diverse backgrounds. We have former prosecutors, former journalists. Myself, I used to work in human rights. We have people who've worked in intelligence community, governments. We speak dozens of different languages. We're from dozens of different countries. And so this is an active part of how we think about recruiting and hiring people into our organization. We want to have an extremely robust debate. When we are making changes to our policies, be it our hate speech lines or our policies on misinformation, we want to ensure that everyone that is contributing can bring a really unique experience. Maybe they have a technical background and they can share something that might not work on the enforcement side. Maybe somebody has come from a human rights background and wants to ensure that we have accurate reflection of our human rights principles in these policies. It's such an important part to ensuring that our policies are in the right place, because at the end of the day, our community standards are global and need to impact people from every type of community around the world. So it's something that is absolutely critical to us in the development of our policies, in the hiring that we do, and ultimately in the decisions that we make as a company. So thank you for the great question. It's very important to us.
Thank you, Jessica. We have a question from Michael Bosicki, who is an author and a contributor on CNN. You can read the full details in the chat box. The thrust of it is a question to all panelists around whether misinformation campaigns have been on the rise during COVID. Michael cites an example of Kremlin campaigns against Western-made COVID vaccines. And then the meat of the question is around accountability. So if you think that the misinformation campaigns have been on the rise, what can be done to make the proponents of those campaigns accountable for what they've done? Maybe we'll work through the same order that we had the speakers. So Lutz, you get to go first.
Okay, we have certainly seen a surge of these campaigns, have also documented them in public reports exactly on this issue, have listed also the evidence, so not to make kind of general accusations, but really kind of looked at facts and figures in particular. The second question is, of course, the elephant in the room. I think there are two aspects to that. On the one hand, and we spoke a lot about this, we can look at the issue from a downstream perspective. So who's targeted? How do we, let's use a very kind of timely word, how can we inoculate, how can we vaccinate kind of our societies against this disinformation and misinformation? It's one of the elements, and it takes a lot of different elements, a lot of different measures that I think have been presented today. The other one is, how do we address the source of disinformation? And this is something we are doing here in the European Union at the moment, where we look at kind of a range of measures that we also need to adapt to the specific situation, which in the end will allow us to impose costs on these activities. Costs literally speaking, but also costs kind of indirectly speaking, by exposing these networks, by disrupting them, by shedding light, by working with Jessica and all the industry, for example, in looking at what are the impermissible elements of this behavior. And I come back. It's not only the content that is so problematic, it's also the way this is done, the actual behavior, the manipulation of the information, which is, I think, a major concern. Back to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Lutz. Jessica, Facebook famously suspended former President Donald Trump. Can you tell us sort of how broad your systems are for dealing with those accountability questions?
Can I just clarify your question, Ryan? Are you asking about how our policies apply to politicians?
Well, not only, but I didn't want to make you responsible for the comment on the Kremlin and so on. But I know that there are famous examples where you've held Facebook users accountable. So it was more just a throwaway line rather than an attempt to direct you.
Sure. Let me try to take a few of those different questions and putting into a single response. So when it comes to COVID vaccine misinformation, particularly the type of content that could lead to vaccine rejection, we take a really strong stance here, and we don't allow it on the platform entirely. Since the pandemic began, like I mentioned before, we've had policies where we've removed harmful content about COVID-19, and since vaccines became available really widely since December, we've updated our policies to account for this, and we remove really harmful vaccine misinformation that can lead to people refusing to take the vaccine. As some of the panelists mentioned, though, earlier on, is that one of the biggest difficulties in combating misinformation about the pandemic or the vaccines is that the situation is changing really quickly, and we're learning more and more about facts just about the COVID virus as we did about vaccines. And so it's my job at Facebook to ensure that our policies are flexible, that we are constantly updating them and reflective of the online conversation. So we work extremely closely with health authorities such as the WHO. We meet with them very regularly. We talk to them about the latest things that we are seeing, and we go to them and we get their input on what is the type of content that is false and likely to lead to harm to people. Just to give you some stats, because I know the question was about whether we're seeing an increase in activity. So since the pandemic began, we removed 18 million pieces of content for violating these policies across Facebook and Instagram. And between March and October of last year, we added warning labels to 167 million pieces of content about COVID-19 misinformation. Now to the second question, what we want to do is ensure that we're not letting bad actors continue to violate our policies. And so we have sort of a threshold of increasing penalties when people repeatedly violate our policies. So if you share misinformation multiple times, you'll see increasing penalties be placed on your profile, your page, or your Instagram account. And ultimately, we will take extremely harsh actions for the worst and most severe repeated violations, such as removing people entirely from the platform.
Great, thank you. Maybe Mr. Fedchenko, Ukraine often finds itself wedged between the EU and Russia, for example. So what's your experience been with COVID-specific misinformation?
Yeah, it's a great question because, as I said, disinformation we've been dealing with can be really harmful. And because most of disinformation Stop Fake was dealing with at the initial stage was war-related. And that's exactly the situation when disinformation can kill people. And here we see that the kind of change of a pattern because COVID-19 related disinformation can also kill people, because if this disinformation brings people rejecting vaccines, it means that they this is kind of harmful disinformation, and people can die as a result of this. And that's bring basically two things together. So potentially any disinformation which is not corrected by fact checkers can be harmful And this is our obligation as fact checkers to defend people from it, because it's not only about conceptual things that, yes, we want to pursue truths, we want to make media more trustworthy, but that comes down basically to the bottom line, how to preserve people's lives. And this is very important mission for us as fact checkers. And for me as media educator and journalist, we come here to the kind of bigger concept, how to do that and preserving freedom of speech and democracy at the same time. So what can be done to balance two things together? Is it possible? So from my point of view, it is possible, because democracy is only available with free media. But the problem with disinformation is that those who produce disinformation, they always portray themselves as also as a free media, and they masquerade themselves as a free media. They invoke freedom of speech clause and other things. And sometimes that confuse people, and they think, oh yeah, definitely we should give them platform as well, and then audience might decide who is more reasonable and who is more factual. Unfortunately, audience in most cases cannot decide it for itself. So that's why fact-checking and fact-checking organizations are important, because we do very important work. We explain to the audience what would be wrong if they would not be vaccinated. What's wrong if they hear one country saying that vaccine coming from United States or EU can be harmful to them, and this is all about conspiracy theories and other things. So we really need to explain all that to people. And when COVID-19 started, we realized that it's even more important to do this very part of journalism, to do explanatory journalism, to fight those who undermine science, who undermine medicine, and using, again, conspiracy theories and using populism to make people disbelieving in what we already know. So from this point of view, fact-checking also became very, very important recently.
Great. Now, the final word before a couple of closing comments, we go to you, Mr. Doxas, for your thoughts on the COVID situation and accountability around the people who deliver this misinformation.
I would agree with Michael's question and suggestion that the information in the information space about COVID and COVID disinformation and misinformation, basically it just skyrocketed. I remember 1.5 years when everything started, our workloads over the next month increased 6-fold. So it was a dramatic increase of how much content we need to analyze, review, and try to understand what is actually happening. So we do COVID disinformation and misinformation analysis for at least last 8 months in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland. And we published more than 22 reports on this. So basically, we found between 70 to 100,000 content pieces every month that were produced. So that's at least more than 500,000 of articles during this period. With our capacity of machine learning and using the previous fact checks of US Disinfo or other fact checkers, we are finding other cases of that were already debunked, but they are still being spread. So we predicted with the machines at least 40,000 articles that we reviewed manually. So our analysts read all of them thoroughly and analyzed by the methodology that I mentioned that is developed by 5 professors and PhDs in the last 2 months. So what they found in those content pieces during this period, it's 8,000 to 9,000 content pieces that were disinformation and misinformation. So the amount, how many articles is produced, we're speaking here about hundreds of thousands of articles that are produced by the hostile media, either officially attributed with regime or through proxies. But just imagine how much does it cost to produce 500,000 articles, if at least one article costs 50 euros. So that is a huge amount. And there's a lot of cases of mis and disinformation. And I would say that one of the problems is that this it's being recycled and reused. The thing of COVID disinformation diplomacy or vaccine supremacy and all the there was very clear of shooting all the directions and seeing where it will stick, and creating this information distortion, so people would kind of lose their interest in this topic and would not know what to trust or what not. So from our perspective, this is very impactful. This is a very large scale, and we do the analysis to present that. And with attribution or what's happening later, it's a very good question. And we think that this is basically, from legal perspective, every media outlet is registered somewhere in some country, in some with some company. And that means that with most of them, different law applies. So the question is how this should be approached. And we think that the best approach would be to think more on international kind of standards of what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And at least this basic common agreement would help a lot. Otherwise, those organizations could be just re-registered to another country and still spread the false content and with no consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've almost stuck to time, but I know everyone here is very busy. So we're going to move to closing comments now. And I'd like to invite Ambassador Harold A. Agerman, who's permanent representative of Ghana to the UN, to kick us off there.
Thank you very much, Ran. And let me first of all congratulate you for doing such a fantastic job of moderating the session. And also to thank the panelists, distinguished panelists, for the excellent presentations they've made and for the expert opinions they've shared. I'm very pleased to have been able to participate in this virtual event on making fact-checking a global practice, and happy that Ghana was able to co-sponsor this event. The various statements that the experts have shared with us this morning reiterates for all of us the concern that disinformation and misinformation pose for the stability of democracies and the smooth functioning of societies. Indeed, due to the pervasive distribution channels of digital information, a fake news that is shared in one part of the world is able to travel several times around the globe, and before the sun sets in the most western city that you can find. We witnessed this unfortunate development, as has been indicated by most of the contributors, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And many countries continue to see a peaking of fake news during major electoral cycles. While the generation of fake news may be difficult to counter, its transmission and distribution is one that requires concerted action to undercut the incentive for those who desire to deliberately churn misinformation or weaponize fake information for socio-political ends, or even sometimes for economic ends. Mainstream media will therefore have a role to play in managing the tension between speed and accuracy in the media space. As we know, credibility can only be established by consistency and trust. In this regard, awareness raising is necessary to develop resilience, but also supportive fact-checking networks and platforms, as we have heard this morning, are crucial to remove the footing of purveyors of fake news, particularly those that transition such fake information from online media sources to mainstream media sources. As a country that believes in an open society and its facilitative role for good governance, democracy, the rule of law, and respect for fundamental rights, Ghana, the government of Ghana has worked with civil society for the establishment and effective functioning of its first online fact-checking platform, Dubawa, which is a Hausa word that actually means verify, and which is also present in Nigeria. It's one of the accredited fact-checking platforms in Africa, and I believe that such platforms and networks represent a prospective node in the regional strategy to counter misinformation and disinformation on the African continent, and serves as a useful reference for any global efforts that may be required to address the concern. However, also, the balance between free speech, which is a fundamental right, and censorship or even libel action will need to continue to be discussed in policy settings and fairly adjudicated in judicial hearings in a manner that encourages responsibility without constraining capacity. and in ways that support diversity of views and opinions in vibrant societies. Before concluding, let me note that listening to all the discussions, there are certain elements that come out quite clearly. The issue of channel managers having a responsibility, companies like Facebook, ensuring that their community policies are done in a manner that prevents the false information from getting out into the public space in the first instance is critical. Also, the role of fact checkers is critical in ensuring that where such information gets out of the channels, there's a reference point. And I was very happy to hear also Dr. Chon mention the fact that mainstream media in Korea serves as a reference point. In Ghana also, it does serve as a reference point. And I remember that people would indicate that until they've heard it from the public interest broadcaster, they will have some skepticism about some of the information that gets out. Also, I am happy to understand that based on the resilience actions that have taken place through awareness creation, I've been part of some online groups, and I have noted in a few instances situations where somebody may put something on it and immediately others would come out to debunk such a post. And so it appears that we are on the right track, and the effort needs to be sustained in a manner that can enable us all to be able to reduce or mitigate significantly this influence that is an unwanted aspect of our society at this time. So I thank you all, and I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to listen to our panelists and to join in the contributions that has been made this morning. Thank you.
And we share our thanks back with you, Ambassador. And now the final word goes to Ambassador Olaf Skog, who is the EU's permanent representative to the UN. Over to you, Ambassador.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good day to everyone. Ryan, thanks a lot for excellent and insightful moderation, much appreciated. And I think we've all gotten a better view of the problem and how massive and pervasive it is. But maybe it's also reassuring to hear many of you experts and very talented people that there's a lot of work going on to counter it in the best way possible. So it's a mixed feeling having listened to the conversation today. But it's clear that in spite of all good efforts here and there, we need to step up collectively as well and work across regions. So that's another reason why I'm proud to see that we were able to co-sponsor this together with countries representing basically all regions of the world. I wanted to particularly praise Maher and for the UN Secretariat's participation, and say that the Department of Global Communications of the UN has really modernized and strengthened its outreach, especially during the pandemic. The Verified campaign is a model of its kind to fight disinformation while appealing to our common humanity. As we've heard today, COVID-19 has shown how disinformation and misinformation on the virus can kill. But let's not forget that every day, disinformation is also used to mislead, sow division, mistrust, violate human rights, incite violence, hatred, and discrimination. So we need to tackle this phenomenon while protecting, as Harold and others have been saying, the freedom of opinion and expression and the freedom of the press. All EU member states signed up to a joint statement in June 2020 on the infodemic and co-sponsored recently the proclamation of a global media and information literacy week by the General Assembly. We did so because we believe further international efforts are needed to empower citizens and to improve their ability to navigate the information environment. The EU is developing for ourselves a comprehensive toolbox to protect our institutions, our democracies, and our citizens. And we're open to sharing our experience with partners that face similar challenges. We're also committed to cooperating with the UN initiatives in the digital arena, not least to address the digital divide, but with a human-centric, multi-stakeholder approach, including with civil society and the private sector. where human rights and the rule of law are protected offline as they are online. Based on this principle of shared responsibility and joint action, we look forward to continue working with the DGC and with member states, but also social media platforms, which have a major responsibility in informing and protecting citizens. So thank you also for your participation today. So we will come with more initiatives, rest assured, and please do reach out to continue the conversation, and looking forward to see you all soon. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you, Ambassador. If there's anything that today has emphasized for me, it's the 360-degree nature of this challenge. So certainly the discussion is not going away anytime soon, because we're going to be dealing with it for a while. For anyone who joined in the middle of the discussion today, rest assured there will be a video available to you, and the EU mission will circulate that. Thank you so much for sticking with us throughout this session. A big thank you to all of our panelists and the people who offered their opinions in the Q&A session. And I wish you all a good day or a good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.